So, welcome to the webinar on embracing records management in M365. I'm Becky and I'm one of two Senior Information Governance and Management Officers at the Scottish Funding Council. In 2025, we started working on our records management project, and this was around utilising M365 for records management. So I'm going to talk a bit about what we've done and the challenges that we've faced so far and sort of what our key learnings have been through the process to date. So why change? So about 5 years ago, SFC moved from an old EDRMS to SharePoint, and this was just a lift and shift. So everything that was on the old EDRMS just got picked up and moved to a site on SharePoint. So currently we have just got one massive SharePoint site with lots of document libraries, which means that search is horrendous because search is trying to search all of that information. People are really unclear around access controls. So because they don't know who's got access to documents, they're storing things on their OneDrives, on their desktops. People are creating teams as a way to give them some control over the information that they're sort of storing. When we started the project last year, we had more Microsoft Teams than we did members of staff. So obviously that's not really sustainable, and people weren't clear on how Microsoft tools should be used. So part of the project is really clarifying that. So we're moving towards SharePoint being used for records, Teams being used for collaboration, and Outlook is a tool for communication both internally and externally. And we're also using Viva Engage, which is for more sort of social communication as well. So the approach we've taken is we worked with consultants to help us design our principles for records management. So actually, what are we wanting to achieve and how are we going to achieve this? And as a result of this, we have taken a hub and site approach. So each team or business area, depending on what they sort of cover, have a hub which acts as their landing page. And then there's multiple sites that sit below those hubs, which are more broken down, sorted by activity. Sites can be moved between hubs. So if functions move where they sit in the future, we can easily move it over to a new hub. It's also really easy to build new sites in the future if team scope expands. So key example of this is we've got an information governance team hub. And then beneath that, we've got a site that access to information. And then the sites are all made up of document libraries. So we've got a document library for FOI requests and a separate document library for data subject access requests. So we've taken this approach because search is better, because the search is only looking at that one site at a time. So it can sort of return what you're looking for. Supports retention application. Microsoft lets you and wants you to apply retention at a high level, so we can apply it to a site or to a document library really easily. And it also allows for greater access control, because again, we can set that at site level or we can set that at document library level where there is a need to do so. So how have we gone about implementing this? We have got a number of directorates. We've got about 4 or 5 directorates, and then the teams sit beneath those directorates. So we've taken a team by team approach, and we've planned our approach based on how long we think it's going to take for us to work with a certain business area and what their workload looks like. So an example of that is we're getting towards the end of the financial year. We know that finance is going to be really busy, so we're not going to start working with finance on the 1st of April, for example. We've also thought about those areas that have already started work on their own structure. Because some business areas have already been thinking about, oh, we want to change our file structure and what should this become and how should we get there? So they are already sort of buying into the project without even really realising it. We've also been very much aware that this is such a big change for the organisation, so we've not wanted to work with too many teams at any one time because they want the teams to feel supported, have our engagement, be able to be there to answer questions when they turn and go, come over Teams call later today. And it's also given us the time to develop training and guidance to be rolled out across the organisation as the project progresses. So we kicked off with a pilot phase. So the pilot began with our smallest directorate, Research and Innovation Directorate. Basically, it's made up of 2 teams. They work really closely together, and one of those teams had already started reviewing its folder structure and highlighting things that could be deleted because they were outside the retention period. So because of this, because already sort of bought in, it made them an ideal candidate to start with. We did a whole team kickoff meeting, so had a chat with the entire directorate in one go, and that gave everybody the opportunity to ask questions, to feed back about where we were going, so it really sort of brought the team on board. And then we've worked with key contacts, so contact from each team within the directorate, and I've been meeting with them jointly when we've been discussing things that would have an impact across the whole information architecture, or if you've been talking about sites that are very specific to one team, just been meeting with them separately. So it also means you're not taking up all of the team's time in one go, so you sort of get that buy-in and people are a bit more willing to work with you, we found. We found that these are a very SFC specific function. So actually how some of their information is currently organised is a bit more organic in terms of how it's come about. So things might have come up and been organised and filed in a certain way because it suited how somebody was working, but actually it doesn't make sense when you then try and look at it as somebody brand new coming in. So it's helped us understand that this is something we'll probably see with other SFC specific areas. So we factored that into our timeframes. We've made sure that we're building in more time with those areas of the business. But a positive is the team was really willing to adapt to the more structured filing approach. As they thought about it, as they reflected on it, we gave them that time to ask questions, and they've come around and gone, actually, no, we can restructure these in a way that makes more sense for the new information architecture. So that's been a real positive, and it's definitely shown to us that spending that time going over their concerns and making sure that they're aware of what we're wanting to do and why we're wanting to do it is really key. So obviously we've designed their new information architecture, and now we've got to map what's going where, because obviously we want to move everything out of the current space and into these new designed spaces for them. So we were taking a while with R&I to get to this point just because of the sheer amount of information that they had. And then when we came to mapping it, this wasn't a straightforward process because folders were hidden within folders, so they wanted to go away and do quite a lot of remediation work themselves. So we started working with our corporate governance team, and in contrast we found that this was really straightforward. So corporate governance, their new information architecture, follows a very similar structure to what their current space looks like. So a lot of the mapping is almost this is going from folder A to folder A in the new space. So it's a lot more simplistic in that sense because it's been organised in a slightly more logical manner from the beginning, just because obviously it follows a very clear approach. So it's helped us understand that difference across the organisation, perhaps which areas might be slightly more straightforward. So we found it ourselves with information governance. We've already got a folder that's data protection, that is now perhaps split over across a number of document libraries, but everything within there is quite logically organised, so it's made that mapping easier. So again, it's sort of helping us to understand as we go through the project, perhaps where our sticking points are going to be. So we have ended up working with multiple teams at one time. So it's mainly come about based on the need to give other teams additional time. So it means that we've not stalled the project, we've been able to keep moving forwards with the project, but we've been able to keep in touch with R&I without putting too much pressure on them. So this is probably something that we will do and are doing again currently. The project is still ongoing, and it's all about managing people's expectations and making sure that we're fitting in around what they're doing as well. So key part of the project is including retention within Microsoft. So not only are we building retention into SharePoint, we are also looking at utilising retention within other Microsoft offerings. So we've already implemented a 30-day retention on Teams chats. So not the teams themselves, but just so sort of every day, can you send me a link to this? What time's that meeting tomorrow? are you in the office? Do you want to grab a coffee? All of that sort of stuff is deleted now within 30 days. Once the project is completed, we will be implementing retention for Outlook and OneDrive. We've not implemented them currently because we don't want people to feel that they don't know where they should be saving those items. So we're waiting for the project to wrap up, and then we'll be implementing retention, and we're looking at implementing a 1-year retention on both. We will probably roll our Outlook retention out in phases. So we'll start probably with a 5-year retention and then just drop it down probably every 6 months, just because we know that we've got some people in the organisation who have been there for so long that they've probably got over 10 years worth of emails. So it's about making sure that we're giving people time to review and actually move things over that are needed. We are also looking at getting some migration software to support with that. So again, it's about encouraging staff to engage with what we're doing. Implementing retention anyway, even within the new SharePoint sites that we're building, is a really big change for the organisation. Automatic retention is not something that we've utilised before, so there's been a lot of hesitancies around this. You know, you sort of talk to people and they go, oh, it's going to be automatically deleted. And it's quite a scary thing because it's a case of this is then truly gone. So a big part of what we've been doing is having those conversations to make sure that the retention triggers are correct. So we've got things that perhaps previously have been on the retention schedule as a creation trigger. So they'd be created, retained for 6 years and then deleted. But actually when we're talking to them, the way that they use that information turns out actually it sits more on a end of financial year, 6-year retention, delete, because of what it relates to. So we've been spending this time as well, making sure that the triggers are correct, that the time held is correct, to sort of allay people's fears in that way. And we have also found that the retention schedule doesn't necessarily capture everything that teams hold. So there has been some times when we'll have to go back in and go, okay, great, but actually this big piece of work doesn't have a retention period on it. What do we need to do? So making sure that we spent that time ensuring that the retention schedule is actually reflective of what we do as an organisation. And some of that genuinely does just seem to be people hold so much information that something's been missed when they've been working on the retention schedule years ago. It's something that we found to be quite consistent across the board. So it's definitely something as the project's been moving forwards that we've just built in that bit of extra time for every team to give us a chance to talk about it with them. As part of the project, we've also been making some other changes in the background to support the work that we're doing. So we've changed our sharing link setting. So the default setting in the organisation was everybody in the organisation would automatically have access to any link shared. And we've changed that to people with existing access. So because of the project, we are looking at those access controls and making sure that those boundaries are in place. We didn't want to keep that sharing link being able to just easily break that and not have any consideration to who you're sharing it with. So changed it so staff have to be more aware of who they want to share with. So it's more intentional. It reduces the risk of unauthorized access because even if the link is accidentally passed on in a long email chain, somebody can't access it who has no need to do so. As part of this, we did get a bit of pushback. People weren't, happy with the change. So we've definitely have learnt from that. We had already provided some guidance for it, but we've ended up running a training session, sort of reissuing the guidance. So this is something that we have learnt from. We've learnt that perhaps people are a little bit more resistant to change than we expected or intended. So this is something that we are building into our other changes as we go forwards. So we've done a big comms piece around the migration work because we've just started migrating 2 weeks ago. Business area is over. So it is, learning from the project as it goes on has been really important. We're also planning on changing how teams are provisioned. So when we started the project, we had more teams than staff. So we are wanting to remove the ability for people to just make teams with no oversight. So we are in the process of working with our IT team to shift towards a provisioning process so that staff would complete a form saying why they need a team, and then we can have that conversation because there's probably a chance that most of those teams will need to be teams. but potentially actually they're not a team, they're a brand new site, or they're actually a document library within an existing site. So we want to make sure that information is being stored in the best way possible. It also means that if a new team is required, we can make sure that retention is popped on it. We can make sure that staff are happy about who's got access. And we can also make sure that staff are aware that they might need to move items from that team into their SharePoint at relevant points, especially if they're using it for a project. Again, we've learned from our experience with changing the sharing link settings, so we'll definitely make sure that we do sort of a big comms piece leading up to this before anything happens, that there'll be clear guidance as well to support it, so people don't feel like something's being taken away from them. They can see why we're doing it, and it's not going to say you'll no longer have a team. It's just we want to make sure that a team is the right thing for you. So what have we learned? We've learned that it's not always going to happen as quickly as we want it to. We are still working with our pilot team. We ended up changing the scope of our pilot as we went, just because the team realised that they needed more time to do some remediation work on the information that they hold. So sort of being flexible, being willing to start working with that next team has been really important. We've learned that things will happen that you don't expect. So we are using a piece of software to carry out our migration for us because it keeps all of that metadata, which is fantastic. And obviously, depending what we're using as our retention trigger, we will need. We couldn't migrate for a month because we were having issues with the software and we had to keep going back and forth to the provider. So things like this will happen and you don't expect that they're going to happen. You just sort of expect, oh, we'll just install it and it can go straight out of the box. And it doesn't. So you've sort of got to have that flexibility that, be able to turn around and go, great, well, we need to keep on at this, but we don't want to derail the project. So we just started working with other teams because we could be building their information architecture with them. We could be working on that mapping and we can be getting them to a point where we are ready to go the second the software is in a state where we can use it. I've also learned that people need to see what it is you want. So when you're talking about Microsoft, it can be quite abstract. It's not necessarily something that unless you're engrossed in it, that you really sort of understand. Trying to talk to people about having a Teams team, just for the team is an absolutely awful sentence. So it's actually a case of what do we mean by that? What are we wanting? So we found that using Visio and Whiteboard have been a really good way of getting people to see what it is that we want. Where is this going? We want a new document library, great. So this is a different coloured box on the Visio, so making it really easy for people to follow along. One of the best descriptions of what we're doing in terms of our approach I've heard somebody use is that we are basically building them a house. And the hub is the house, and everyone's got the key to the front door because all of the team can access the hub. And then the sites within it are different rooms within that house. And you might have a key to every room, you might not have a key for every room. And even if you can go into the living room, you might not necessarily be able to access all of the drawers in the chest of drawers because they're your document libraries. So it's about finding ways to talk to people that they get. We've also learned that you need to make sure that you're meeting people where their levels of understanding is. As an organisation, staff's understanding of SharePoint as a whole is quite mixed. You've got people who perhaps have used it and been very much back-end users, so very much all like, oh, so we can set our own access on this, and are probably miles ahead of where we're thinking as a project, because you've got other people who don't understand the technology that sits behind it. So you need to make sure that you're bringing everybody along, and that for some people that will mean that they just have to go a bit slower because you don't want to be running ahead while some people are just learning to walk in that space. We've also learned that everyone will do it slightly differently as well, but it doesn't really matter as long as the endpoint is the same. So when we've been mapping migration with business areas, some people, like corporate governance, have just been really happy to map it out on the whiteboard that we've been using, because for them, it's really much that folder in the new space is called boards. We've got a folder that's boards at the moment, and they marry up perfectly. For other spaces such as R&I, actually they found that almost recreating the new structure in their existing space as different coloured folders and actually going and moving things around and tidying it up It's been so much easier for them. But ultimately, we'll get to the same point where we can turn around to IT and go, it's all of this stuff and it's going here, and it'll be still straightforward. So it doesn't really matter too much how they get there, as long as you get what you need at the end. And senior sign-off and support has been a key thing that we've learned. So when we've had pushback over the link sharing, actually having those senior leaders come in and go, no, we support this. This is a really good idea. It really strengthens what we're doing as an organisation and where we want to be heading towards, has been a really important thing about making sure that people understand the importance of the records management project, especially when people have got conflicting priorities. So in conclusion, change is a gradual process, and you've got to be persistent and try and communicate what you're doing as clearly as possible. We've got a project deadline of the end of May, and that is what we are telling every team that we're working towards. We know that we've got a bit of flex in that, but that's what we're aiming towards. Don't let it run on sort of open-endedly. Make sure you know where you want to be and when. You want your senior leaders to support you and show it. So we've been using Viva Engage and posting updates on there, and we've been going out to senior leaders and going, can you like this? Can you share it again? Because it's all about increasing engagement and showing their support for what we're doing. And the other thing is plan and learn and adapt as you go. So that brings us to the end of the presentation.